Welcome to the Workforce Situation Room, where we spotlight some of the promising and innovative solutions that address some of our most pressing workforce and economic challenges. Our mission at Workforce Solutions Borderplex is to power businesses to prosperity by empowering people with tools and opportunities to reach their potential in the workforce. I'm Bianca, your host, and I stand alongside our ladies of leadership at Workforce Solutions Borderplex with Leila Melendez, our CEO, Alma Aranda, Workforce Development Director, and Karina Castillo, our Senior Research Analyst. In this room, we all believe every situation has a solution. For today's episode, here's the situation. Welcome, everybody, to Workforce Situation Room. We're continuing with our Women in Economic Development series in honor of Women's Month. Today, we have two awesome leaders in the economic development realm. We have Tracy Yellen. She's the CEO of Paso del Norte Community Foundation, among several other nonprofit organizations that we'll get involved with. And then we have Andrea Hutchins, the CEO of the El Paso Chamber. I actually want to kind of bring up to the audience, maybe some of our listeners might come from the same audience, Andrea, given that you were doing podcasts in your previous role with Thomas J. Miller. And the way I came across Andrea was she invited us to a podcast a couple years back during COVID to talk about workforce development and all the chaos and the pandemic and everything that was going on and what we were doing as a workforce development board. So if you can tell me, Andrea, like you've jumped, obviously you were not living in El Paso at the time, and now you're back as CEO of the chamber. Can you give us a little bit of insight of like a day in the life of Andrea and what it's been like to transition from your previous role, where you actually had a lot of hands-on strategy with economic development, and how you're bringing that back over to El Paso?
Sure. So I feel like recently a lot of the day in the life of is my hair on fire all day. I'm sure Tracy can relate to that.
All of us.
Yeah, exactly. I think people who are not necessarily working in economic development don't always understand the breadth of the economic development industry. Obviously economic development can mean anything from workforce development to, quality of life initiatives and, recruitment of talent and business and all those different things. So economic development professionals wear a lot of hats, and that is certainly the case here at the El Paso Chamber. So there's a lot of good work, I think, to be done in El Paso in particular. And post-pandemic, the whole community has a lot of energy. So lots of good stuff happening.
Nice. And you're so right. Like when you think about the definition of economic development, there is so much that goes into it. And moving on to you, Tracy, and just to kind of give the series that we're doing is speaking to different women in the role of economic development. And I'll tell you that each woman that we're speaking with is in a completely different type of organization, completely different type of role. They're doing completely different things, but it all falls under that umbrella of economic development. Can you tell us, Tracy, your bio is explosive and amazing. And can you tell us a little bit of how your role is involved with economic development locally? I mean, from the philanthropic side to the health side. I mean, give us the whole thing.
Sure. So yes, we wind up getting involved in varying elements of economic development in the community, either directly or indirectly, as a family of foundations here in El Paso, southern New Mexico, and also Juarez. We are the largest set of foundations in the region, making grants to nonprofit organizations to improve education, health, social services, economic development, and quality of life. So much of what we do touches different components of either someone's individual life, their family, or their business. We do a lot of work with the nonprofit community, which is the fifth largest employer if you took them together as a sector. So making sure that they are strong in being able to deliver the services that families in our community need, whether it's food or education or STEM or arts or employment. Sometimes and it seems like a lot recently involved in resilience. So we managed $38 million of rental assistance during the pandemic and 10 different COVID funds, including small payments to restaurant workers who had lost their jobs. That was actually a partnership with Workforce Solutions when the businesses were shut down. And so that was helped someone kind of sustain their livelihood. And now we're moving into some more direct economic development activity, working with Opportunity Youth, ages 15 to 24, who are defined as young people who are not in school or in the workforce, really identifying opportunities for them to be engaged in our economy and self-sustaining and productive. And then also doing some work with the City of El Paso and the Aspen Institute and the Chamber on supporting small businesses through a one-stop center that really provides that direct kind of wraparound support that small businesses need to be able to grow, to be resilient, and then to also be able to grow.
Oh, so it's an initiative. So I like this because I kind of heard somebody, I heard the Better Business Bureau doing something similar, at least like talking on the wraparound, kind of what we call in branding, the consumer journey, right? So like if a person sees an advertisement on TV, that's the first touch point. And then their next touch point is to either call the 1-800 number or go to the website. And then from there, like you kind of want to make the journey very succinct so that the call to action is immediately rewarded and they get the benefit, right? So is this something similar where you're working together with Andrea to help businesses that may be all over the place on what the next steps are, and then they just kind of get everything all in one place?
I think it's going to be many things for different businesses. So some of them, it might be fundamentals, shifting from a written ledger to a digital online accounting system. That accounting system then allows them to produce a financial statement, and that financial statement then allows them to draw down an SBA loan or a PPP loan, some basic fundamental kind of access to capital that allows a small business to scale, to grow, to expand to another location. I think for businesses, they will be in different places, but it will definitely focus on kind of core fundamentals and access to the resources they need to be able to thrive.
I love that. That's awesome. There's so much happening like that's on the horizon. I feel like COVID kind of had everybody in this crazy hustle rush of trying to, it was a reactive solution type situation where we were trying to fill the holes in the sinking ship, right? But now that we've kind of overcome it, we're in a place where we almost had a bunch of ideas on hold, or even the creative power that we typically have as leaders. We couldn't exercise it as much for forward thinking, for innovation in that sense. But I feel like right now, from all the women that I've been speaking with, there are so many amazing, innovative ideas to support businesses, especially for economic development. But since you all have this perspective, I mean, Tracy, and then this question is for both of you, given the solution that you just described, what are businesses struggling with the most right now that is pulling down on economic prosperity? Like what are they facing? What are some of the challenges that they've been facing most lately?
I'll start with the nonprofit sector. And I think some of these themes will probably apply to all business, but I serve on the Federal Reserve Board branch for El Paso, and really looking at what are the things that are currently affecting our businesses and in our nonprofit organizations. One is access to workforce, finding enough people to fill those jobs. The second and related is kind of the wage pressures. So that's a good news, bad news. The good news is that wages are increasing in our community, which is are really great for our families. The challenge for small businesses is how do you afford and sustain that, and how do you compete for talent? And so it's still kind of a market that's driven by the worker, which I think is fantastic, but it is kind of a barrier to sustainability and growth. And then we've been really I think the pandemic was so challenging in so many ways, but it was so disruptive in so many positive ways. It forced innovation and digitization, and kind of, we looked at our nonprofits where they moved from, let's say, the Center for Sexual and Family Violence, where they were moving to only they moved from in-person only therapy sessions to telehealth. And that telehealth, it might have taken them years to make that change. But it's been so important. They have greater participation, fewer cancellations, and greater access to people. They don't have to have childcare or a car to be able to get the kinds of support they need. So those kinds of transformations that happened with the disruption, I think were really positive. But there's still lots of hiccups now, but I think workforce and finding enough employees is one of the major ones.
And how about you, Andrea? What have you seen as far as challenges within businesses and while your hair's on fire?
So, I mean, obviously, Tracy hit the nail on the head, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I mean, obviously, workforce is the biggest issue, like by far. But it's kind of interesting to me. I mean, you had talked a little bit about how there was all these plans and things in the works, right? And then now we're innovating and doing things post-pandemic. I almost liken it to if you were on a stage, right, and you were in the middle of a play, and everybody said stop for all the people who were in the play, and then they rearranged all of the furniture and the entire set and the entire storyline. And then we're like, okay, now go. I feel like that's kind of where we are right now. It's like, okay, go. But everybody's like, wait a minute, what's the new storyline, right? Because there's so many
I don't know my lines.
Yeah. There's so many things that have been changed that I think we're still trying to figure out kind of what the new normal is, right? Like I think for a while, everybody was saying, oh, work from home is going to be the future and all office space everywhere is going to collapse and nobody's going to work again. And I think we're seeing that that's just absolutely not the case. It's not sustainable, for everybody to work from home forever, right? And so, there's people that are kind of trying to find their happy medium as far as, we do 4 days a week, maybe we do every other day, maybe we do when necessary. I mean, everybody's just trying to find their new normal, right? But I think that's the case for a lot of established businesses. For those businesses that are really kind of coming online post-pandemic, I think that there are a lot more resources out there that are available because of the pandemic, because of federal investment, because of the digitization that Tracy mentioned. But the real gap that I'm kind of seeing is those companies that made it through the pandemic, they might have actually made it through a little bit better than where they were before, but they don't know how to scale. So when you look at scaling a business, it's much different operating a company with 5 employees versus 50 or versus 500, right? And so I think a lot of people struggle, especially for those CEOs or owners of companies who maybe they don't have support in the form of like a COO, or they don't have support in the form of like a real office manager, or they're really kind of missing some of those core fundamental functions of a business. They're doing everything themselves, and then they're trying to scale on top of it. And so for the chamber, I know we've been trying to kind of look at where at each level of business we can fill those gaps. So for instance, we're looking at an intern and apprenticeship program where specifically relying on the apprenticeships piece more than anything, we might be able to help when it comes to workforce, and we might be able to help when it comes to, maybe some marketing and just different things that businesses often ignore because their head is down, they're producing widgets, and they're not thinking about working on the business.
Got it. Yeah, it's the dust is settling while they're still learning their lines, and it's cloudy, exactly. And the curtains maybe not even all the way open. Yeah, I totally understand that analogy. And that's, we're with everyone that we're speaking with, aside from like access to capital and resources and understanding what steps to take to grow outside of just sustenance. Workforce is front and center. I've been taking the economic development route by learning more with IEDC and been spending a lot more time with trying to get the certification. So I'm seeing a whole new side of it. Like having been swimming in workforce development all these years, now I'm just like, whoa, there's a whole other world. And so I'm understanding it a lot more, but believe it or not, as I go through each of these classes, and they're all over the country, mm-hmm. Everybody's hands are like workforce. And I'm like the expert suddenly, like, and it's really weird, but it's been a really good experience. And what I recognize, is that they're thinking in economic development boxes. And, mm-hmm. and although they understand the need of workforce and workforce development, we have, constant practice with how we're how we're providing solutions to workforce. And the thread with the shortage or not knowing and retention and worker attraction is we have two really big problems: the shortage, but we also have a really huge problem that we recognize in workforce development that may not be recognized across the board, is the issue of what happened with youth. And you mentioned, opportunity youth too, but all youth in those 2 years in terms of dilution of education, like not just education, but social life, right? Like, and a lot of these kids in the adolescent years, they dealt with, these are the most important, kind of like toddlerhood, but in teenage world, the most important social years, as their hormones and brain development is happening at this crazy fast spurt. So having lost the opportunity for social development in those years because they were stuck in a box with online learning, and then also just the unpredictability, the craziness of not really having consistent education and teachers that knew what they were doing, we have a huge gap there too. And maybe that gap, obviously there might be we might be seeing some of the results of that gap with some of what we're seeing on the news and some of like just issues happening with the younger, with the youth. But we're also seeing a workforce shortage. So we are starting to recognize at Workforce Solutions, and maybe, and let me know how you feel about this, because I would love your feedback on this. But having a worker shortage and having this issue with youth that lost out on education, we're starting to recognize that if we bridge these soft skill development programs, which to an extent could be considered a social development aspect, and we start to give them some real life street education, right? Obviously not academics, but education with working with an employer that's willing to be a mentor. That kind of, it doesn't 100% replace what they lost in those 2 years of COVID, but it certainly does help patch up a lot of what they missed out on. So that's something that we recognize, and we kind of stumbled into with one of our projects in the past couple of years. But that's something that I bring up in these classes, and people are just like, whoa, we can do that. And these economic development organizations don't even realize that they can do this with workforce boards, or that WIOA funding exists. So I don't know, I'd like to hear both your feedback on how we could bridge those two problems, and if that's something that you might consider into your whole side of trying to resolve what you're seeing with these challenges.
For us, and this does go back to my work with workforce. I think this was something that needed to happen pre-pandemic, and so the fact that it's just been accelerated is the internships and apprenticeships opportunities. Just the really, it's interesting. We have more access to information than ever. You would think that you could Google any and every career imaginable, but younger folks just don't do it. And so I think educating them on the career pathways that they might, one, not only be best suited for, but two, they might be most interested in, and allowing them to do that through internships and apprenticeships. But even starting early, we're seeing in like Kentucky and Ohio in particular, they have programs for like elementary school students, right? And so they're not just focused on high school. I think for the most part, when we think, an internship or an apprenticeships, we think either a senior in high school or somebody who's about ready to graduate college, and we leave out this entire group of people who, might be a junior high school, or might even be post, graduation, and they're still struggling with what to do when they grow up, right? And so I think offering them programs through internships and apprenticeships are not only becoming more commonplace, but we're also seeing a lot of private companies who are creating and running entire programs and school systems just to support those type of initiatives, because they know if they don't set up those programs that they won't have a future workforce. So I really do think that the younger the better when it comes to those type of opportunities.
I see this happening in like kindergarten classes a little bit too, kind of like, what do you want to be? Like it goes back to the, what do you want to be when you grow up? But
yes,
being a little bit more strategic with it, like, here, pick from this list of target occupations. Right?
We have Blue Origin right down the street, right? Like we have all these amazing, super high tech programs that a lot of kids don't even know about. So I think just exposing them to what is in the community is super important.
You just gave me an idea. So we'll have spacesuits
Welcome.
visiting from workforce to all the kindergarten classes. What about you, Tracy? What are your thoughts on the bridging the two of workforce with education?
Well, I think, the pandemic was very challenging for students and families. So you had working parents tried to connect to their workplace while their, two or three children were, ages kindergarten to fifth grade. We're also trying to learn online. And it was a very difficult circumstance for lots and lots of families to have access to broadband, the technology you need to connect effectively, and then the oversight and environment to learn well as well. I'm the mother of two college age students, so they were in high school and college during the pandemic. And the flip side to that is they are very tech savvy. They are they are now our home IT departments. They are a generation that really understands how to interface online. I think what we need to do now is to help connect them to people in person, where they can build additional sets of social skills that are really important to their mental health and well-being and their long-term resilience. So on the one hand, many kids did very well. We sometimes would tease our daughter that she got her degree from El Paso High School and TikTok. There were many things she learned and taught us from TikTok, like recipes and all kinds of things. But they had an interesting way to stay connected. At the same time, so many of them were so isolated. So how do we reconnect people in person and build those personal relationships that help them do better in their education environment, pre-K to 16, and then also phase into the workforce. We don't want our high schoolers and our college students to graduate from online school into an online job only, because I think there are long-term societal consequences to the lack of interface. And we've already seen the increase in mental health crises and trauma from so many families because of this lack of connection. Those bridging between elementary and middle to high school to college, or high school to some sort of certificate program, and then into the workforce. I think we all are going to have to think differently about how we engage this next generation, so they feel valued and they're meaningfully integrated into our workplaces, whether we are fully in person or hybrid or remote.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And Andrea, you mentioned like we all thought that working from home, teleworking was going to be the future. Like that was just, but brick and mortar has to exist. Like you have to like be in a physical, I mean, you can't eat through the metaverse, you can't cook through, you might be able to learn skills, but you need the six senses, you need to smell things, you need to taste things. And I mean, unless we're all taking pills like astronauts and eating like that,
Red,
like, it's not
red pill or blue pill, right? Like
right. We do have to have, yeah. And I mean, I get that. And it's like, there's this really fast advance into technology, which is great because it's accelerating and helping us evolve with problem solving and health and a bunch of stuff. But I mean, the primitive side and survival thing is still so important just for survival. Just, we still have to, it's almost like we should have certifications for how to shake a hand. Like you learned proper greeting etiquette, what I mean? Like shaking hands and cursive, like writing cursive and knowing how to do a signature, like those lost arts of just being in person and not doing something through technology. I think there's a huge importance in preserving that. But I don't want to go off too much on a tangent because then that's a whole other can of worms. But since we're on the topic of youth, Tracy, you mentioned that you are working more closely with Opportunity Youth recently. How is Paso del Norte advancing that, or how is that tying into economic development?
Sure. So, we came to the work in Opportunity Youth with a health lens. And so our perspective is if youth are connected, they have a greater chance of being healthy or adopting healthy behaviors. So if you are 7 to 15 and you're in an after school program, you're less likely to smoke or drink or kind of engage in behaviors that would be detrimental to your health. The same thing is true and also incredibly important for our workforce and our economy for those young people ages 15 to 24. And we define them as, again, young people who are not in school or in the workforce. In this case, this population is pretty expansive because it's those youth in particular, but also we have stopouts and dropouts because of the pandemic, because they never returned to high school. Or, I think I heard the Workforce Board share this really powerful statistic that if a high school student doesn't go to a community college or four-year university the first year out of high school, they have a 1% chance of returning. And so in our community and economy where nearly 2/3 of our workforce are making below that kind of living wage or now below that $18 an hour wage, that continuing education is so critical. So how do we reach this vulnerable population that are very diverse in of themselves? They may be, someone who's left high school for a variety of reasons, and it might have been because they could get a $15 an hour job to help support their families, which in the short run is probably could be a good decision for their family, but in the long run might be detrimental to their future capabilities and earning power and success. Secondly, you have certain populations that might be justice involved or pregnant or parenting that have caused them not to be in the workforce. So, and they live in different places in our geography, so they are not monolithic. They are not, just the same. And so you need different strategies to reach different subsets of this population. But we need them. If we want to grow as an economy, we need them in our workforce to, and we need these are terms in your, business to upskill this young population. We need to educate and upskill them so that they are ready for the jobs of the future that will drive our economy. And we have lots of opportunity coming at this moment of time with, you'd mentioned, or Andrea had mentioned Blue Origins and kind of the space industry and aerospace industry, manufacturing in Juarez and El Paso, to be the back office for engineering or tech. This population is essential. And so we are working with UTEP, with Workforce Solutions, with the Trellis Foundation, with the Aspen Institute, and the nonprofit community that surrounds these young people to identify them, engage them, and find the right strategies where we can really help propel them forward.
They're truly an asset, that population. And I like to use the term barrier backgrounds, because if you can find a way to first find them and then refine them, like where you can instill the education, the training and skills, you've got an individual that from the better half of their life, not longer, have survived adverse environments, adverse situations, and overcome them. So that brings a whole wealth of solutions development. Like they can come up with solutions in a way. And the reason, and I speak more of this from experience and also recognizing within our own organization, different individuals that bring that barrier background that allows us to really connect and understand the people that we serve. And that brings these like, oh, well, here's this issue, be it poverty or be, something that, or domestic abuse or something like that. And having someone within the staff having experienced that, survived that, or been able to get through it and find a way out of it allows us to bring that situation and serve that as a potential solution and opportunity and come up with programming developed around that. So they really are an asset that you don't really think of that benefit of what they have survived and what they've been able to overcome. So it's awesome that you're doing that. And jumping over to you, Andrea, you mentioned earlier that there's a lot of good work to do in El Paso. There's a lot of energy in El Paso. I believe you 100% with the energy, because just meeting you two and everyone else that we've had the opportunity to speak with, I mean, the ganas is there, right? But what type of good work is the El Paso Chamber working on? I mean, you are doing so much since you've arrived. what are some of the priorities with leading the chamber, leading businesses, and leading economic development overall?
Sure. So, the chamber, we have a pretty long-standing business plan. Our chamber's been around since 1899. Other chambers have been around since the 1500s, right? So, we exist really to support businesses in general. That looks different in every community, and every community's needs around their business community and that support looks a little bit different. I know for our community, one of the big things that we have really, like I said, a longstanding history of doing is the networking piece of things, making sure that there's good opportunities for businesses to connect with one another. That's important for a variety of reasons. One, you get to learn, who your potential customers are. A lot of B2B occurs, through those particular programs. But then also, you learn of other best practices with other entrepreneurs and, just learning how to grow your business from other people who are struggling from the same things. I will tell you, and this doesn't necessarily get back to the workforce side or the economic development side, but we also do a lot of advocacy work. And that's important because having a thriving business climate and a thriving business economy usually comes from having business-friendly policies and business-friendly laws and things like that, whether that's from the local government, from the state government, or even from the federal government. So we've been partnering a lot with some other entities around the community, as well as from the state and the federal side, to make sure that our policies here in El Paso and in the state of Texas are appropriate for El Paso businesses. El Paso being very, very far west to the majority of the rest of Texas, doesn't always have a strong voice when it comes to the business side of things in policy and in Austin. And so we've been really trying to make some additional headway there here more recently. And then you probably are aware that my husband's active duty military Bianca, and that's why I've moved a few times. And so we are trying to do what we can to make sure that we're bridging the gap between our business community and Fort Bliss. For most people who are from or around a military community or around a military base, they know that there's a lot of business opportunity there as well. And so really trying to kind of rethink the way that El Paso thinks about Fort Bliss and the opportunities that are there for business, and not just for Fort Bliss, but the federal government has a lot of contracting opportunities, and I think sometimes for being a border community, we have a tendency to take those things for granted and not understand that one or two contracts here in El Paso could lead to 10 or 20 contracts across the country, and so there's just a lot of opportunity here in El Paso that, kind of being geographically isolated, we sometimes forget about the whole rest of the country being out there as an opportunity for business. And so trying to help some of our members kind of reframe that mindset.
And my gosh, I'm so glad that you brought up Fort Bliss, because I worked there for a few years. I did the events and marketing for Freedom Crossing for a while before I jumped over to workforce. And I mean, having done events, and I mean, we're talking like 25,000 people sometimes with festivals and those major country concerts, and realizing like how amazing to see this giant population of hundreds. I remember the stats being something like 165,000 with troops, spouses, and different contractors that worked within the area. And seeing them come in to these events, and I'm talking people from all over the country. It was this melting pot of America in this little pocket of a concert, jamming out to Naughty by Nature or something. And then you see El Paso's crowd. And I remember being on the stage and saying, whoa, like this is, you don't see this often, where you see a melting pot of the entire country, diversity, in joy and having a good time and dancing and just seeing the possibility of that. I remember being in awe of how amazing that was. But it was only like a moment here, a moment there. It was, certain events. And I agree, like there should be more of a fusion of what we have in Fort Bliss to come out into El Paso and recognizing that bringing that synergy together. I love what you're doing with the military ball and making it a thing this coming. I actually was an ROTC when I was a freshman. I was a pickle for from 1999. And military ball, since I was a freshman, it was like my first opportunity. It was my first prom, right? And I remember how exciting that was, and all the boys in their uniforms and us in our gowns. So I'm really glad that you're bringing that back and giving us an opportunity to dress up again. Like I'm excited about the ball. It's been a while, so that's awesome. I really hope that with the grant that we just received, that there's some sort that we can do something with not just the soldiers, but integrate business and really just, and explode that, because I saw potential just in an event, just a one-time event, and seeing it, and I can see potential with economic development. Time to convert that over. And so yeah, that's awesome. And so I have one more question for you, Tracy, and I'll try to close it off so that we stay within the time. But I noticed that you sit on the boards of Borderplex Alliance. You're on the Federal Reserve. You have a very unique peek into economic development stats and perspectives that are, super well-trained economists. How do you take what you see and what you gather from those board meetings into what you're doing as the CEO of Paso del Norte? I mean, I get that there's the health and that, but what do you extract from those opportunities and bring back to El Paso through your org?
Sure. So, I think making the connections of what's happening in the economic development world and the information that we learn at the Borderplex or from the Chamber or from the Federal Reserve, and then sharing that with nonprofit organizations so that they can be the strongest, best organizations that they can be. We know that capacity is an issue for organizations to have enough staff or have enough resources to be able to meet the needs of our community. Also data. I think we're in the data loving community. So how do you take that data and also share it with organizations so that they can use that to meet the needs of our community? Advocating for El Paso and our demographics and our community needs in these organizations. So what does it mean to live on $15 an hour in this community? What does it mean to support we have more than 38,000 single female heads in household in our community living in poverty. So what kinds of policies or advocacy or economic development strategies or workforce development strategies can we advocate for to better support our families? Ideally, the nonprofit sector is not the fifth largest sector in our economy. And that we have, higher paying jobs where people can sustain their livelihoods without that subsidy. And, that's in an ideal world. Until then, we need to deliver the best possible services to help families prop themselves up to be able to support themselves, contribute to our economy. So, maybe it's the bridge in both directions, sharing what these organizations need, what our community and what our individuals and families need in our community, advocating for policies that affect our region, not just El Paso. We are one community. So what happens in Juarez affects what happens in El Paso. Bridge closures during the pandemic affect everybody. So just, being that messenger for our part of the world. Andrea had mentioned that sometimes we are isolated, closer to four other state capitals than our own in Texas and in the, in the nation, obviously. So we need to speak loudly on behalf of our communities, and we are grateful. I mean, we just have such fantastic leaders in really key positions, and we are grateful to people like Congresswoman Escobar, lots of women too in these positions, who are bringing added resources to our community at this moment of time that we can take advantage of them, and then it's just helping connect all those dots, so we do take advantage of them.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now we're asking everyone that we have on this series to provide their vision. If you each had, and we almost already do, but if you each had a magic wand to be able to create an ideal situation when it comes to the economy in the next, say, 5-10 years, what would be that perfect ideal vision if you could just make it happen and there were no issues, no barriers, no lack of resources? what would be the ideal situation? What would El Paso look like if you could bippity boppity boop it?
Honestly, I do think a lack of direct flights here has such an impact on our economy, and it's one of those things that
Wow.
people really, I don't think of. But think about this: if you are Johnson and Johnson and you have a location in Juarez and you're considering opening one in El Paso, like how motivated are you going to be like at doing that when it takes you 3 plane trips? You're from New Jersey,
Wow.
right? And so we hear about how coming to El Paso takes all day. And so, for major Fortune 500 and even 100 companies moving here, most of them are not going to look to move their headquarters here. If they were to move here, it would be, a new office, maybe 50 or 100 people to start off with that would be able to coordinate with the maquilas in Juarez. And so when you look at the pay of those type of companies, it's greater than most small companies that would be here in El Paso. So when I think about, one of the things that we're lacking, I think about, the direct flights would impact tourism. The direct flights would impact, a number of things. And then I guess maybe I'll also add, we already know that our downtown, can do a lot of great things here in El Paso. I think any downtown is a huge asset to its community when it's historic and vibrant and has a lot of, just hustle and bustle, right? And so I think taking full advantage of the living space that we have available to our downtown, and then working as much as we can to try and fill up some of those empty spaces and continue to renovate. And we don't always have to do it through, tax abatements. I know that all the time people are like, TIF, TIF, TIF. Sometimes there's other ways of trying to, entice investors into a specific area. And so I guess maybe the third and final, so first thing would be flight. Second thing would be really reinvesting and continuing to invest in downtown. And then I think the third thing is El Paso doesn't realize how great El Paso is. It's full of a lot of people who most of them are from here. They love the community, but they haven't necessarily ventured out enough to see the great potential that is El Paso. And so sometimes El Pasoans are their own worst critics. And I know that happens in every community across the country, but I've lived in a lot of places and it's probably pretty primo here in El Paso. So
like it's almost like we need a self-assessment and then a reality check. We have to do these at work. We have to do these like self-assessments. And then our coaches tell us, here's how you rank yourself and here's how everybody else ranks you. And It's so shocking to see how low you rank yourself. It's like an identity crisis, like on the wrong way. Like, wake up, El Paso. We almost have to have like a Wake Up El Paso campaign where we like show all the, I agree. El Paso is amazing in so many ways. I think because we have this like perception, we have visibility with data or with recognizing talent or just seeing potential in a different way from our roles that we see it. We almost have a duty then to be the cheerleaders, right? To blow it up. So there's another idea. Wake up, El Paso. Sorry, Andrea, you're an inspiring person. You're getting all this going. But so how about you, Tracy? When it comes to your magic wand, what are you going to do? What would you do?
I think I would do two things. One is really get us to that living wage where we no longer have to subsidize the families, and then we have the tax base to be able to invest in the things that our families want. That just makes a really great place better. So, I think that would be one, just that really fundamental livable wage for most of our families. And then for the rest of the world to understand what a beautiful, unique place and special and important place El Paso is, and not the dangerous kind of misconceptions that people have about our community because they don't understand that it's an asset to live on the border of the U.S. and Mexico, and not a deficit. And I think if more people in our country knew that, El Paso would be in a better place.
I agree. There's that stigma of, a forever stigma of just what the dangers of Juarez and the whole drug war and everything, but still El Paso being ranking in the safest cities, right? Like, but I again, I agree with 100% with how important the city is. And also for those listeners, that aren't aware of what a living wage is, it's really the wage that's necessary for a family to be able to live with a good quality of life and be able to cover the majority of their bill, or to cover all their bills, while still maintaining a form of recreation and enjoying the city, without any kind of dependence on benefits. And at this, Workforce Solutions does an annual methodology that's from MIT, that MIT calculator, where we determine what the living wage should be, and it fluctuates from year to year. But this year it jumped to $15.91 an hour, and that was partly due to inflation, and of course just everything that's going on with the wage wars, which is a good thing. I think I want to say it was in the $12.50 range right before that, or $12.90 range. And then it went to 14. But it did jump significantly in the past couple of years. So it is good. But, like you said, Tracy, it could be good. It could be bad, just because small businesses are struggling to maintain that. So, but we're working on that as far as business services and trying to support businesses in that front. But those are great magic wand solutions. And let's, hope that we get to that point in the next 5 to 10 years. That flight thing, I never considered that, Andrea. So that's interesting. It does take an entire day. And I mean, we have like an 8-hour flight to DC coming up this Friday, where it's a full day. You gotta leave at 5 a.m. to make it. And maybe you'll get dinner if there's no delays, then you have the delays. So I never thought about that. Well, Thank you so much. This was such a refreshing conversation. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're really busy, but thank you for taking the time to chat with us. And I can't wait. I can't wait to hear the final piece and send it over. And thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
We're eager to hear your feedback. Find us on Twitter and LinkedIn and let it out. We don't always have a choice in the situations we face, but you do have a choice in subscribing to Solutions. Join the Workforce Situation Room on your favorite podcast platform and hit subscribe, where you'll find a solution to every situation. The best way to serve the community is to get real and understand the pulse of the Borderplex. Till next month.